It can take a minute. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the June #exchange SA chat. My name is Yusra Iftikhar, and I'm your APTA Student Assembly Director of Communications, and my gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm joined tonight by my guests, Michael Cromartie, Briana Scott, and Mark Agholor. I want to give just a quick statement, quick disclaimer, and then we're just going to get right into the interview. Quote, "The unrest in our country is a response to more than George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor, or the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on racial and ethnic minorities. It is a response to generations of death, despair, fear, and suffering," end quote. APTA President Sharon Dunn. In alignment with President Dunn's message on racism and systemic inequality in America, and in recognition of the fact that we as a profession are not immune to the everyday realities of its people, the APTA Student Assembly stands united against racism, systemic oppression, and discrimination, and stands for addressing health disparities and improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. We began planning this exchange chat a few months ago, but have since decided to refocus the conversation with voices from those that can best speak to what is most important right now, the Black SBT and SBTA communities. I'd also like to give a quick disclaimer on behalf of tonight's panel. We know that these conversations can be difficult to hear, especially for those of us for whom they are new. We hope you'll view tonight's conversation not as calling out any one person or institution, but rather an opportunity to learn and gain valuable insight from 3 recent graduates. And on behalf of myself, to everyone watching, I want to acknowledge that I tweeted earlier this week from my personal page that I promised to maintain your anonymity tonight, and I intend to stand by that. So please ask your questions free of the fear of judgment, and I'll ask my board members who are scanning for questions not to send me the student's name alongside the questions. I hope you'll also watch tonight with the recognition that my guests do not have this option of anonymity. So we hope you'll allow us all grace, an open mind, and your understanding that while Mark, Mike, and Briana have powerful voices, they still represent only themselves and their experiences. All right, let's just jump right into it. It's funny because we started planning this a few months ago, and my intent was to highlight all these student voices. I didn't think about the fact that we all would have graduated by now, but I think that everyone is going to be super excited to get to know you 3 and to hear from you. So Briana, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Mike and Mark. If y'all don't mind just introducing yourselves, you can tell us whatever you want us to know, what program you graduated from, where you're at now, and yeah, we'll start there.
Okay, cool. So my name is Briana Scott. I went to Georgia State University for my undergraduate education, and I went to the University of Miami and Miami, Florida for physical therapy school. I'm originally from California, Southern California, San Bernardino. I now live in Atlanta with my husband, and I work at Benchmark Outpatient Physical Therapy Clinic in Camp Creek on the South Side. And I also work in Piedmont Fayette Hospital on the weekends PRN. And that's me.
Awesome. All right.
Hey, everybody. My name is Michael Cromartie. I attended Stillman College for my undergraduate education. And along with Briana, I went to the University of Miami, where we graduated last May of 2019. I'm also the author of the blog Code Switching that you may have read. As well as currently I'm residing in Miami, Florida, where I work for the Miami VA Medical Center.
All right, Mark.
My name is Mark Agholor. I originally am from Houston, Texas. I graduated from University of Houston for my undergrad, and I am a recent graduate of University of Texas at El Paso. My area of interest is orthopedics. So right now I'm just studying for boards and just trying to look for jobs amidst COVID.
All right, well, everyone hire Mark if you're listening and you're looking to hire. Reach out. His information will be in the comments at the end. All right, so let's just jump right into it. So in the title of this chat, we mentioned fostering allyship in DEI, DEI standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Could someone briefly just mention why those 3 terms are different, why we say all 3, and maybe a quick definition of each?
Okay, I'll start. I'll start with the diversity part of the question. So diversity is for many different cultures, religions, ethnicities, sexualities to be represented in a particular program or institution. So you just want to have different voices, you know, different faces, different perspectives represented where you are. Equity for me speaks to the quality of what's being received by each of those different groups of people. So the quality of the experience that they're going to have, the quality of the experience of getting into the program, graduating from the program, so that equity is kind of like, are these people having the same type of experience, and is the quality the same? And then that inclusion is not for the voice just to be there, but for the voice to be heard and to be incorporated into decisions that are going to be made by that institution. So for me, that's what those three mean to me, and the definitions that I kind of ascribe to each of them.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so, sorry, go ahead. Someone else going to speak?
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I agree. And just to kind of go on with your other part of that question, kind of about why we mentioned all three together, I think you can't have one without the other. You know, if you have diversity in a corporation or in a group or organization, it doesn't really, you know, hold the true value that it can if there's no inclusion, you know, if that diversity is not being celebrated. So I think, you know, in order to achieve diversity, you need to, of course, have equity. And then once the diversity is there, it's important that we are inclusive. So, you know, that kind of analogy that people will mention of, you know, not only should you invite them to the dance, but once they get there, you should actually ask them to dance with you. That way they at least feel welcome, their opinion matters, and things of that nature.
Absolutely. So I think that, you know, the idea of DEI and those efforts is something that is probably pretty easy for a lot of us to get behind. But what would you say to those who say, well, we need to focus on becoming good PTs and PTAs? Why is this important for our profession?
I think I'll speak to that a little bit. One, I think it's been reiterated like multiple times, both by APTA and just like the health community in general, that we need to reflect the patients like we treat, and we're trying to, we can build like a better interaction with patients that we come in contact with by reflecting that patient population. So getting more students that are like that population would help immensely.
As well as also just to add to it, you know, we're not in the clinic by ourselves. Our colleagues, you know, when we go to conferences, we won't all have, you know, be fortunate enough to be in a room that looks just like someone like us. So it's important that, you know, we're educated on these kind of topics or know how to handle ourselves in these situations or environments where everyone doesn't look the same.
I did on what they're saying, yeah.
All right, perfect. So let's talk about, you know, your voices and the way that you've been using them to aid in these DEI efforts. All three of you have written blog posts for the APTA Pulse blog about being a Black student in a DPT program. If each of you could briefly just talk me through what was that process like, writing those posts, and what's the reaction been like after putting something that's not just a passion of yours, but something that's a lived experience of yours just out there into the PT world?
Oh man.
Briana, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Mike and then Mark.
Yes, it was. I actually wrote some original personal blog posts. They were called Dear Minority SPT. I wrote 3 of them. And that was just me expressing my experience to my, you know, social media platform. And it didn't really occur to me that I should share it to the APTA until someone brought it up to me. And then when I did that, I realized now that I'm going to be speaking to a bigger audience, is there any more that I need to say? And I do remember one process that happened was I sent my raw, you know, post, my original writings to the APTA Pulse, and they came back and was like, okay, this is a lot. Break it up into 3 different posts and do this and do that. And I was like, oh. And so it was a little bit hard for me because I was like, you know, I put my heart into that and my voice was there. So to take things out and move things around was a little bit of a struggle, but I still think they did a great job of capturing exactly the voice that I wanted to carry, which is that it is not easy to be a Black student in physical therapy school. And it's something that really just gets hushed over. It's not something that Mike and I and our other two classmates were able to talk about with our classmates. It was something we could only talk about with each other. And I thought that, you know, getting it out to the APTA would allow other Black students to know that they're not alone, that if you're 1 out of 30 or 4 out of 30 in your class or 4 out of 60, you're probably experiencing the same things we are, and it's okay. We should probably get together and like have a support group or something. So it was a fun process for me, and it started before I even knew the Pulse was a thing.
Awesome. All right, Mike, tell the crowd about your blog post, which has pretty much at this point gone PT viral.
So actually, I actually owe that to Briana, because one, she was the one that told me to submit it to the APTA. But even before that, before I even put pen to paper, reading her story definitely inspired mine. You know, I initially started the blog after we had a guest lecture at Greg Todd came and talked to us and kind of told us, get your name out there. And I had wrote several blogs before then, but then I was like, all right, let me write something that's a little bit more personal. And that's when I decided to kind of just really speak on my experience. Didn't have any intent of it going anywhere. I posted it to my blog website and could let it, see as many people as I wanted to see by how much I decided to spread it on like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And I think I posted in October, right before we left for clinicals. And then in January, it may have been you, someone, it made it to the Pulse and someone retweeted it on Twitter, and that was like a long day of me at the clinic just like swiping to see how many people had seen it. And I was like sweating bullets because, when I started writing it, people in my camp, I'll say, kind of were like, be careful writing this, because I grew up in the South. They kind of, our, experiences or, interactions with dealing with race and things like that aren't always met with the best, consequences. So they were like, you may not be employed. Like, people may think that you're trying to rile people up or start a movement, things of that nature. But I'm like, I'm, not trying to prove a point, just sharing my experience. And so to see the reaction, where people were kind of embracing it and commending me for sharing my story, in my head, I'm thinking like, I wasn't thinking I was being a brave soul or anything like that. I just was kind of putting out there how I felt or what I was going through. But then also to see on the other side, how many other people could relate, that was something that, I was like, okay, this was worth it, and definitely enjoyed that I, did decide to do that. So. Yeah.
Do you mind briefly telling everyone what your blog post was about?
Yeah, so it was titled Code Switching. And if you're not familiar, kind of code switching is basically where, people will change their language or their language style based on the environment that they're in. And it's kind of almost serves as like an essential skill to help you be accepted in the society. So like, if you are used to being around, a certain demographic that may talk a certain way or their mannerisms may be a certain way, then when you get to an environment that you're not as familiar with, then what you'll try to do is basically emulate the perceived actions that you think that they do. So like, for me, I have somewhat of a Southern drawl, so like, or I talk really slow. But I tried to, or at least when I went to PT school, tried to pronounce every letter. I wasn't, skipping or shortcutting any words, just so that, I at least sounded what I thought the rest of everybody else sounded like. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot, Mike and Briana, that you both just said that I definitely want to come back to. Mark, though, I want to give you a chance to promote your blog post and tell me a little bit about that experience. That one was called The Look.
So kind of following on what Mike was saying, I was inspired by both of you guys. I read both of you guys' posts like when it came out, and Brianna's, yours hit home. Mike, yours really hit home. And I just wanted to, I thought that was like a good thing to like try to show how your experience is in PT school as a Black or a minority student. I've always had a passion for writing, so I just kind of decided to use that and put my experience on paper. And before I submitted that APTA blog post. I was writing my own blog. Uh, I had written mine well before any of the recent events have even transpired. So it really had nothing to do with any of the recent murders. It just kind of happened so that it came out when this was going on, and it had kind of related to it. And since it hasn't been out that long, I don't have like a complete gauge on it, but so far I've gotten an incredibly positive response from it. And I just wanted, I guess I wrote it to just share my perspective. And so like minority students can kind of see that the journey, what the journey can entail, and that it's not impossible. And that can like even make you stronger.
Awesome, awesome. So I think that, one, it's really cool to hear that, you know, obviously all of your voices matter quite a bit, not just to all of us that read the Pulse blog, but to each other, and that you were able to inspire each other to then put your stories out there. I think that's huge. Briana, you mentioned that it's not always easy to be a Black student in PT school. Any or all of you can answer this. For those of us, you know, who don't have that same lived experience, why is that? Why is it not easy to be a Black student in PT school?
So I'll start by answering that. That was exactly what my blog post was about. It was called Pressure. And basically, when you are at this level of higher education, you pretty much understand that a lot of people don't know where you come from, and they don't know how much harder you had to work to get there, whether it be because of lack of finances or just not being in a good school district or not having the money to get to school. So one of the first barriers is money. Like I had to raise money just to even move to Miami. I was selling Herbalife. I was selling my fitness skills. I was an exercise science major. I was doing personal training for extremely low rates, just trying to get enough money to like get a moving truck because I needed it. So that can be the first barrier. And then once you get there, you need even more money for your books and all these things. So that can just be the first problem, having the resources you need to even study and be successful. Another thing that you have to kind of worry about is like imposter syndrome. And I necessarily didn't have that, but it is this kind of idea that everybody else is not going to think you're as smart as them because of the stereotype of Black people. So you already know what people think of Black people in general. And you kind of have that fear that they already think that about you, or you might even really mess up and start to think that about yourself and think that you don't belong there, especially if you don't do well on a quiz compared to somebody. So there's a lot of comparison going on to everyone else in the group. And you have to really be careful of that because it can steal your joy pretty quickly. For me as a Black woman, like my hair was probably a whole problem in itself because I didn't feel comfortable at first wearing, you know, my natural hair. It's very big, it's kinky. And when I did start wearing it, everybody wants to touch it. And I didn't have the guts to say, you know, please don't do that because it literally can take, I've spent 24 hours on a hairstyle before to make sure that it's neat enough that I don't get told, hey, you need to go and fix that. So when someone just comes up to you and does this, it's like, oh my gosh, please don't do that. And I didn't have the courage to do that. There were times I literally bent my head over so they could touch my hair. So I didn't come off like an angry Black person or, you know, being weird about it. So even having that to deal with, making sure your hair just looks fine, takes away from study time, it takes away from a lot. And to even feel confident once you do get it right to go into class and just feel like a normal person can take a lot of courage as well. And then the overdoing it in group projects, overstudying, trying to get perfect grades, also that you can feel, like I said, compatible with everybody else and that nobody's gonna take your, like you getting into school, take it away from you because, oh, she's getting C's and B's and it must be because she's Black, essentially. That's like the thought that goes into your head. So you do everything you can to be the best in the class. So nobody can say about you or any other Black person that they're not smart and they don't deserve to be in grad school.
Yep. Does anybody else want to speak on that?
I'll kind of add to it a little bit. You know, I know Briana said she couldn't relate to the imposter syndrome, but I've got like I guess, somewhat funny story. But like when I got into UM, we had orientation and like I told some of the people in the class after the fact that I was waiting to get to orientation after I flew down from Atlanta the night before for them to say like, oh, we made a mistake, like your name isn't on the list. And like for like whole first month of PT school, I was waiting for them to like say like, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Cromartie, we made a mistake. I don't know how this happened, but like I was just waiting for someone to tell me that, you know, it was an accident that I got into PT school. And like, you know, for me, I've always been proud to be Black, but like as I, you know, went higher in education, I kind of shied away from the topic of being Black because I didn't, like she kind of said, I didn't want people to discredit me on why I was there. I didn't want people thinking like, oh, he's here, you know, and I've heard these, you know, like microaggressions, like, oh, he's here because of affirmative action, or, you know, there's a quota that needs to be met. And, you know, so I try to just completely shy away from even discussing me being Black because, you know, I know how hard I work. We all know how hard we work to get there regardless. And, you know, for someone to just come in without knowing the work you put in to say something like that, you know, will become frustrating, you know, along with already embedding that imposter syndrome that you have. And so I just used to like try to shy away from even touching on the subject.
Yeah.
I want to add a little bit on that with the imposter syndrome. Like personally for me, I've had it since I got in the program. It hasn't left at all. And I don't think it will go away until I pass my boards. And so I finally see that little circle that says pass in the middle. So I've lived with this since I got into PT school. It's continued. I think it's significantly reduced over time, but it's still there. And part of the doubt comes from me not like getting into PT school on the first try. And then another part of it is like when you finally get in, you're around like the best of the best. These are all people who got in PT school on their own merit. And you're in a cohort of people who are all talented and smart in their own right. And you try like measure yourself up to them. And then of course, part of it too, even though you don't want it to be, but if you're like one of the few minorities in the group, then it's like kind of makes it more difficult because in the back of your mind, you're like, well, yeah, if I'm not at like the top of this group, then you might feel like, oh, I'm just here to fill a spot. So to speak, like
Yeah. Mike, you brought up the word microaggression, and I was wondering if you would mind like briefly just explaining what that is.
So I guess in my eyes, a microaggression is kind of like an indirect or, you know, like unintentional expression of like racism or sexism, ageism, you know, and it's those comments that they may come from people with well intent, but, you know, they still cut deep as the people with the intent of being, you know, sexist, ageist, racist, anything of that nature. So it's kind of those, you know, oh, you speak really well, you know, it's like, what are you implying? You know, I should be able to talk just like everyone else, or, you know, like I said, the affirmative action, you know, statement that people like to make. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did all of you think you'd be talking about race and racism this much when you got into PT school? Do you think it would have been not only a topic that came up a lot, but that you would be kind of the voice on it?
Definitely not.
Resounding no. For everyone listening.
Like I tried to shy away from it. So when it, you know, when it came up, I mean, now that I see that I've kind of got a voice, I definitely want to take advantage of it. But like going into PT school, I was like, let me just kind of fly under the radar so no one's questioning how I got here or why I'm here. And then, you know, people like classmates quizzing me or something like that, you know, trying to see if I'm smart enough. So, you know, when it started, I was like, uh-oh, here it comes.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, you know, when you're talking about, I guess, racism or anti-Blackness or something like that, that's not really something that you can just kind of turn off and walk away from because everybody can see it. And so it's, I'm sure, very tough. Is it at all frustrating to be expected to now be the voice about race and allyship and all this stuff? Is it something that you welcome? Is it a little bit of both?
I definitely welcome it. At first, like Michael said, I remember being in the group the Facebook group for of students getting in. And I remember when I saw that there was 2 other women, Michael wasn't there yet. I was like, I'm not even gonna sit next to them. I'm not gonna do that whole thing where we band together. I'm like, we'll just try to be with other people and just, like you said, just kind of blend in. And then when you get into school and you realize that the pressure is still there, that there are microaggressions flying, there is some racist things going on in your school, you quickly realize how much you need to band together. And then ultimately, I think what led to me even writing my original blog post was like, somebody needs to hear about this. And I honestly did hope my classmates would read it because I didn't know how to address them personally or one-on-one. And it was after I had an incident that was very offensive to me is when I started writing those. And I think it was because, yeah, somebody needs to understand that the things that go on in society, they happen in this micro pool in your PT class as well. And it's not okay because we're supposed to be building up people who are gonna do no harm to anyone. But yet we have this kind of culture of segregation in physical therapy schools. So how are we expected to go out and treat patients equally? We don't even think of each other or treat each other equally, and we might not even be aware of it. So now I love talking about it. I'm not shy about it. Come at me, that's how I feel about
it. Yeah. Anybody else wanted to add?
You can go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, microaggressions, they happen all the time, but I think what's frustrating is part of the battle is just getting the other person to admit that it actually is a microaggression before you can even start explaining it and everything. Because if they do, for instance, Briana, if someone comes up to you and touches your hair and you're like, oh, no, don't do that. And then maybe you start wanting to explain why that's not okay. And then they're just not even taking that. Then how are we even going to continue on from there? You can't even meet me halfway, so to speak. So yeah, it can be pretty frustrating. And then, if you don't have that many people around you who can speak to your experience, then, it's like a million people against you. And then obviously if there's an onlooker where it's a large group against just you, then they're going to side with the group if they don't know anything about the topic. So that's what kind of makes it more frustrating, having allies or having people try to help you out. It just kind of works against you. So.
Sure. So when I brought up issues of racism in a lot of different settings and with a lot of different people, I've been told, well, we can't know how to fix the problem if we don't know what the problem is. And for example, if students don't speak up, then how can we know, what to do? We can't read your mind. But why is it that students might not speak up? Any insight?
So I guess, so I know, I guess, you might have that fear of if you speak up that they may discredit, they may think you're overreacting, or you're that stereotypical, mad Black person, you're mad at the world, you got a chip on your shoulder, and you basically you're trying so hard for 3 years, Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, not to feed into these stereotypes that people, assume about you. So, while it becomes frustrating, it just almost becomes an internal burden that you're carrying rather than trying to voice it. Because what if you do finally speak up and you're like, all right, this is the moment, it's gonna all stop once I speak up, and then nothing is done about it. Now you've lost all hope that something will happen or change. And so you're like, you know what, it's almost better that I just keep my mouth shut, and at least I can hold on to the possibility of hope of when I do speak up, something will change, versus speaking up, nothing changing, and then you're like, this is the way it's gonna be.
I definitely was afraid because I did speak up about something that happened in school, but it wasn't until almost a week after that I spoke up, because I was going back and forth asking God, I was asking my parents, asking, some fellow PT students, what should I do? And all of the fear was the same, well, you might get retaliated against, they might put you in the corner. If it gets out to your classmates, they're not going to be down with you anymore. So just the fear of being completely rejected, and just like Michael said, just overlooked and told that you're basically crazy. That's not racist. That's not microaggression. And then for nothing to be done about it. So fear almost made me not speak up. But for me, it's I'd rather lose it all than for
I think I didn't really ever shy away from speaking up, and whether that hurt me or not, it is what it is. But just overall in general, like as a guy, whenever you want to like speak out against anything, from some people it can be perceived as you being weak, like, oh, you're just supposed to like shut up and take it. And then added on to that, as a Black man speaking out, you 100% have to be careful of how you express yourself. Like if you get too much bass in your voice or speak too loudly or show any type of emotion, then you're automatically aggressive or angry, even when you aren't. Like if you talk, even if you're like talking in normal voice or like a little bit higher than normal, it's, oh my God, why are you so loud? If you're quiet and literally just sitting there doing nothing, then people read your body language like crazy and it's normally negative. Like me personally, I kind of have a deep voice. So whenever I speak, I get kind of odd reactions. It's either like kind of positive or kind of negative. Like on one hand, like people kind of like it and it tends to be like women, but we're not gonna go there. But and then on the other hand, like some people kind of get annoyed when I speak up. So that's kind of an added challenge. But, you know, with the topic of microaggressions, I think I would just like for us to be able to get into a space where you can sit down with somebody, express and say the things that have bothered you, and then the party acknowledges it without getting offensive or defensive or what have you. An apology can follow, and then everyone can just resume a schedule now that we like both have a mutual understanding. But what often happens is people are quick to get defensive, or when you start explaining how things are like hurtful, and then they're quick to be like, oh, I'm not racist, but like that's not what you're really saying. And then they start listing out all these reasons, and then nothing gets solved, and then they just spend all this time trying to like run away from getting this like tag, like, oh, I'm not racist, but really you should try to be anti-racist.
So what does that mean? Like what's the difference between me not being racist and me being anti-racist?
Not being racist is just, I feel like you have these like certain extremes in your head of things that are automatically racist, no matter what. It'll get you looked at, shunned upon, like these are the negative people in society, and I'm trying to stay away from that. But in reality, there's like, I know there's this one graphic that a lot of people have been sharing of this pyramid, and the top part of it is like the overtly racist things, like saying the N-word or saying, you know, like the really offensive things. But then the whole bottom part of the pyramid is like the little things that still add up to that, like it's the base of the pyramid. And doing that stuff too is often what it leads to the microaggressions. It adds on to the reason why we can feel uncomfortable in a space. It's not really the top stuff. A lot of people know how not to do the top stuff, but it's the bottom stuff that it goes unaddressed. A lot of people don't know it, and it adds on to like kind of the way society is. So being anti-racist is looking at that whole pyramid and trying to not looking into yourself, first of all, and not wanting to build onto that or add into that. And then also looking around with your network, your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, and like call stuff out when it's happening, as opposed to like staying silent. Because staying silent, that's basically like, you may think you're being not racist, but you're just letting things fester and letting things continue. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So would any of you mind touching on some people in your life who've done a good job of that, who've been, you know, we use the word allies, who've been strong allies to you? I'd love to hear maybe either or both, like as a student in the classroom and then maybe as a student in the clinic.
Hey, Michael, I see you about to talk.
Okay. So first, in the classroom, I don't know if it'd be name dropping. Okay, well, one of my classmates who, Bree knows exactly what I'm talking about. You won't see me without him. When I initially got into PT school, it was a quick turnaround, and just to make a long story short, I needed a place to stay the night before orientation. So I reached out in the Facebook group and no one responded. But thankfully, the saving grace of Briana, she responded and, allowed me to stay with her so that I could attend orientation the next morning. And, looking back, I was very frustrated. But my good friend, Mark, he actually, he doesn't use Facebook. So that's why he didn't see it. But when I told him my story at orientation, I told him I wouldn't have a place to stay once I came back down with the rest of my stuff. And he said, hey, here's my number. Like, when you get here, I'll send you my address or pick you up if need be. You can crash at my place until you find a place to stay. And like, from that point on, I was like, oh, he doesn't know me left from right. And, he openly, welcomed me and allowed me a place to stay. And, for him not to know me and to be a complete stranger, I was like, okay. And, whenever somebody may have had a microaggression, once again, even in a joking manner, before I could even fix my lips to defend myself, there he was, drawing attention to it. So like that whole not racist versus anti-racist, he was anti-racist. He would like speak up. Also now at the current job that I'm at, who was my former CI and now is my coworker, he was like the first thing I experienced as an ally of someone older. Like I know kind of the millennial group gets it, I guess, or whatever. We kind of are more progressive, I guess is the term. But like, my biased or unconscious bias towards older white men growing up in the South is they're not favorable towards younger Black men. But he was like the complete opposite. And I think what made him such a great ally is that he was not uncomfortable saying the words Black or white. Like he was still himself, allowed me to be myself. We openly talked about race with everything that's going on now. He's even told me he's got 2 little boys and he sat his oldest boy down who's 9 or 10 years old and kind of showed him the video and everything and just told him about everything that's going on. And, I feel like that's making him a great ally because he's trying to help dismantle this, repetitive cycle by starting with his son and kind of educating him at a young age so that he doesn't go through middle school, high school, college, thinking that these things are okay or that's just the way it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, and I have an ally. We're not name dropping, but she was in my class. She's Puerto Rican and Mexican, and she was someone who I would also classify as anti-racist. And not only that, she was a little firecracker too, and she was friends with everyone. She was friends with myself and some of the other African American women. She was friends with someone who had complete opposite views of her, politically. I mean, just everything. She actually became friends with him and they would argue all the time about everything because she was just not afraid to speak her mind. And she was genuinely curious about the injustices that would go on. I knew she's someone that I can trust and I can talk to openly about how I feel without, fear of any type of microaggression. And I know that, her heart is truly genuine. So I just love her. If she's watching, she probably knows who she is too. And then as far as the clinic, I didn't really have too many allies in the clinic, but higher up in academia, our program director at the University of Miami is a very good ally as well. And in her position, that's not hard to do because she represents a lot of people and she has a lot on the line as a program director. But if you even just look into what her interests are, all of her research is in health disparities. A lot of her research is in minority retention and recruitment. And even in her fostering our conversation, we had a UNPT family conversation. She was extremely concerned about how to get this conversation going. And she was so humble. She said, I understand I'm a white woman and I don't even know if I have a place at the table, but I know I have a responsibility to do something. So I would definitely consider her an ally and I definitely appreciate her a lot.
Yeah. So now I'm wondering, everyone who's listening in is like hearing these stories and they're like, that's who I want to be for my friends. Like, I want to be that person who's not just an ally. They're not just, not racist, but I want to be actively anti-racist. Now, with everything that's happening right now around the country, there have been a lot of resources that have been shared, especially if you're on social media. You're probably seeing it all the time. And so that can be a little bit overwhelming for people too. So I'm wondering, what if somebody comes to you and says, I read all 3 of your blog posts and I've donated and I've read the books and I've watched the documentaries, like, now what? So that's one part of it, is like, now what happens, but also the people who don't feel comfortable speaking up right now, because allyship can come in a lot of different forms. So what do you say to the people who say, well, where do I start? How do I speak up for this? And how do I start that conversation with my classmates or my colleagues or my students or whomever who are Black? It's a lot of questions in one. So wherever anyone wants to start.
I think I'll try to tackle that. So like if you're on social media a lot and or just have been wondering from your different interactions, like, oh, how can I help? I think, like I mentioned before, it's starting off, just look inside of yourself and try to root out any biases or like negativity that you've held towards any groups of people who either look different than you, have darker skin than you. Look at the way you've treated people in your life and think about how you could have done things differently. Or maybe like even reach out to some of these people who you feel like you've done wrong and make amends. More so because I think a lot of the heavy lifting that needs to be done and the way we're really going to change things, like, it's really like, we can only do so much. And by we, I mean like minorities. If you're in the majority, like, you guys have to do the work, because the majority is the ones who are in the, higher roles, higher positions, and are making the decisions at the end of the day. They're the ones who make up most of our classes, make up the faculty, make up the majority of the CIs, the clinicians. So, we can talk all day in this group and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. But then if the group that needs to actually do it and hear it doesn't receive it and do anything with it, then we're just in like this echo chamber and nothing's really happening. So this is first, have the conversations with yourself, with your family, with your friends, when we're in the room, when we're not in the room, especially, and just try to create a place where we can feel welcomed. So, and I think overall, being an ally, you need to be able to like acknowledge issues when they occur or when they get brought to your attention. Try to like seek understanding, or just like try to assist anyone that you feel like is kind of having not the best of time, like when they need you. Call out microaggressions or like racist situations. Don't just like, when you see something happen, don't just, pull someone to the side and whisper like, oh, that was wrong. I don't think that should happen. Like, stand up and say something in a moment, because you telling me something that's not gonna, I'm not the one doing anything, it's the person. So call it out in the moment, let the person know, let it be a teachable moment. It doesn't need to be something negative, but let it be known. Support causes, bring awareness to our issues. When it's time to help out, don't just disappear. Be like all the way in, don't be halfway in, don't just try to do a little bit, but just be all the way in. And I think most importantly, whenever we are talking or whenever we are trying to bring stuff up, listen.
Yes, I agree with Mark. And I'm probably going to be the one to just stomp on a toe real quick, but ultimately, you have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable enough to speak up. At the end of the day, all of Mark's suggestions are going to eventually result in you speaking up some way. Either that's inside of your house with your family, that's at work with your coworkers, that's in the situation if you're witnessing something, that's on social media, that's with your voting. At some point, as an ally, you cannot continue to hide your voice, because your voice is what matters, because Black people, minority, are such a small percentage of the country, and we can easily be ignored. I mean, it took a lot for the civil rights movement to get going. It took a lot. A lot of people died. 1 million people had to get on the lawn. whereas things get done all the time. Bills are passed all the time with the majority without any type of crazy demonstrations. So you can't avoid speaking up. Eventually you have to dig inside of yourself and be unafraid and be uncomfortable, because the fact of the matter is the minorities are uncomfortable a lot of the time, and we don't have a choice in that. And you get to have a choice in being comfortable. And if you want to see change, you got to be uncomfortable. So I'm not going to shy away from saying an ally has to speak up. That's my position on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I want to give you a chance to talk on that too. Do y'all mind if I tell you just a quick story too about, Mark and Briana, you've both brought up looking inside yourself and kind of dealing with your own biases. And whenever I hear someone say that, it always brings to mind a professor I had at Duke. He's an older white gentleman, and he's a neuroanatomy professor. And so he relates back a lot of things like neurodiversity. And he talked about how he's taken implicit bias tests, because implicit bias is one of those things where it's subconscious. We don't know, always like what our biases are unless we actively are, like y'all said, looking inside ourselves, addressing those things. And my favorite class of his was when he put up his results of his implicit bias test in front of the class. And he was absolutely calling himself out. And by the end of it, he said, I'm sure I've offended every single person in this room by now, because he had biases against Black men. He had biases against Muslims. And so we're all just sitting there like, well, I don't know if I trust you anymore. But the entire point was to say we all have these. And now we know this is a starting point. So now we have to work on how do we mitigate these? How do we minimize these as much as possible? And that starts with, like y'all said, using your voice, whether that's out in front of 100 people, whether that's in an exchange chat in front of hundreds of people, or whether that's, in your homes with classmates and family. So I just appreciate both of you bringing that point up. But Mike, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Not really. I did in the comments of the exchange chat, I dropped in a link for that implicit bias test that's done by Harvard. And I think that's kind of like the first step, identifying what your biases are, especially PT students love numbers, facts, things of that nature. You get to see your results by clicking on that. Once you identify, your biases, now you can take those small steps, whether it's speaking out at the watering hole, on break in between lectures, or, in the office or break room at work. And then, once you kind of get comfortable and grounded in that, now you can kind of take a bigger platform by going to social media. And then you see someone, I feel like everyone's got a story from someone in their high school who's still in the same town of their high school, sharing some crazy story that's probably not the best. And, now you can, say, hey, this isn't cool, and this is why it's not cool, because now it's a larger platform being on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and so now you're now ready because you made yourself comfortable by doing it to people face to face.
Yeah. So when microaggressions come up, when we slip up and make mistakes, a question I've gotten a lot is, what do you do in that moment? Certainly your answer might be different from somebody else's, but say we use a microaggression against a patient. Do we say sorry immediately if we recognize it? Do we bring it up? Do we acknowledge it at all? Or do we just hope they didn't notice? What do y'all think?
I would err on the side of caution, and I would identify it. If you have a microaggression, especially because how we're seeing the statistics in the healthcare disparities with COVID-19, just to be safe, I would, apologize. We're humans and we make mistakes, especially if you had, good intent, then it's no problem in backtracking. I would rather that than, hearing a colleague have a microaggression and just kind of either sweeping it under the rug, because now that's the first of many I made here. And it's like, okay, he hasn't yet. This is clearly an issue, and I'm not sure that this is someone who should be out treating patients if this is really how he's feeling, because what could be perceived as a microaggression now might just be direct ageism, or sexism or racism. So, I think addressing it definitely helps kind of eliminate that elephant in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So regarding allyship and identifying these microaggressions and et cetera, being so just such a hot topic right now, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. I've also gotten some questions about performative allyship. And I was wondering if any of you would mind speaking about what is performative allyship, How do people avoid it? Is that something that we should even be worrying about right now?
Yeah, I'll try to talk a little bit towards that. Performative allyship is like supporting a cause just so people think that you're on board for the time being, and then not putting in any legitimate work, like when things kind of settle down. So for instance, just posting a single IG post and then not helping out any members of that particular group that you're supporting. And then you may, even in the post or whatever you do, like you center yourself instead of the actual cause. So it's kind of like you're just hopping on the bandwagon.
Cloud chasing.
Yeah, perfect. That's the best way. But yeah, you aren't like truly an ally. For instance, like just recently we had the Blackout Tuesday. You posting a black box doesn't mean now you're an ally. Perfect example, Drew Brees. He posted a box, but then said something the next day. But you just because you post something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like automatically gung ho for the cause. So
yeah, I agree. And if you have like any questions on kind of what performative allyship is, on Twitter, there's like this big trend going around where people are releasing statements about what's going on. And then, Twitter is so great, they'll dig up old tweets or actions and quote the tweet and say this you. So if you just type in this you on Twitter, I'm sure you can see examples. For example, the 49ers, they've got this performative allyship. However, they, basically cut Kaepernick after, peacefully protesting, taking a knee, banned from the NFL, but yet now they're all, standing with the cause. So, stand with us, be down for the cause, but at the same time have action behind your words or your actions. Don't be that person posing for the picture of all the protesters behind you, and then 15 minutes later we catch you, grabbing your Starbucks across the street, headed home or whatever it may be.
To that point, there's going to be a lot of people who've done things in the past they're not proud of, and said things in the past they're not proud of, and they want to be an ally. And so I feel like if you're going to take that step and say, okay, I want to be an ally, you also have to go back and address some of the things that you said and did wrong. And if you're on social media and that's where you're being an ally, you're going to have to take the responsibility to address that. Like, hey, I know I said these things. As a 49ers, we apologize to Colin, or we might hire you back. Like, you need to kind of go and correct your action and don't just kind of put this blanket over and kind of like start from here. Like, you did say some things, you need to address that was wrong, so people can see that you're addressing your mind change and not just being on a bandwagon.
And I think, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, Yusra, but following along with what Briana was saying, with social media, even though people don't want to admit it or address it, like, social media is a very unforgiving place, and they are ready to dig up whatever and then completely oust you from society forever. I don't know, because I do think some people, we all make mistakes, like nobody's perfect. If you look back on any of our posts 10 years ago, I'm sure there was something that you said that was a little off from the way things are now. Like any like comedian or however, if you look back at what some of the things that were said, there's also like a room full of people who are laughing. So the way we talk is more or less dependent on like the way society is in that moment. So chances are we were okay with saying things way back when because everyone else was. So it's not so fair to just find something from one person and then use it to attack them now, because I'm sure you might have said something similar. So, but I really hope more people at least will try to take the steps and the effort to try to correct themselves and just be like, oh, I messed up. I've changed since then. 10 years is a long time ago. So now whether social media or whoever wants to forgive you, I don't know. I can't really speak to that, but hopefully we kind of move more into a forgiving place where we don't just kind of oust everyone, because eventually no one's left because no one's perfect. So
Right. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I do have quite a few more questions that have come in, some things that I'm curious about. So if anyone's listening, I may go over just by a little bit, if that's okay with y'all, because I want to do this conversation justice. So now now talking to the people who are ready. Maybe they've already spoken up and they're getting pushback. So that might be from leadership or other people in power in a program. That might be with family. So what do you recommend to the people who are now, they're in this fight, you know, they're ready to be allies, they're ready to speak up. And it is one of those things where y'all said, like, it can be really disheartening if nothing changes or you're not believed or something like that. So what do those people do next?
Stand 10 toes down. You're not speaking up or fighting for anything wrong, in my opinion. And anyone who thinks that you speaking out, you need to question that organization that's, you know, coming down on you, because it's not like, you know, this time we're fighting for something crazy, or, you know, this is in my eyes basic human rights. So, you know, in my opinion, if you're receiving backlash, just continue. You know, I'm going to reassure you that you're not fighting for something wrong. You know, continue to soul search. But if that company doesn't appreciate you for speaking out on the right thing, then maybe you should disassociate yourself from that organization, company, group, friend, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I definitely am trying hard to empathize, because I'm seeing some people post like they're losing friends, family, even disowning them for speaking up. And I would say if you're a person of faith, you know, that's when you need to dig into that part of yourself, because you don't want to like be a hypocrite and just side with them just for the sake of not, you know, losing a certain friendship or a job, when you know in your heart what is the right thing to do. So I think that whatever is in your heart is what you should stand by. And the people who are truly for you will stand with you. And it's just going to be shocking to see who leaves your side. But that just may be a sign that that person wasn't really meant to be in your life at this time, not this season. And maybe you'll be able to teach them in the future. But for right now, you definitely want to surround yourself with people who will love you regardless. And I just want to say my prayers out to any person, ally, whose family is literally cutting them off for taking a stand. I really think that's outrageous, but I know it's happening. So
yeah, absolutely. It's not easy, but it's one of those things that's worth it. And like you brought up earlier, Briana, you know, some of these things, I mean, it's uncomfortable and it's tough and it's hard, but the minority's been uncomfortable and dealing with these tough things already and for a long time. So that just means you're just part of the fight now, you know, even if they can't completely understand your entire lived experience. I got a question about sort of intersectionality of identities. June is Pride Month, and we've even got a part 2 coming up to this exchange chat focusing on that. And so how do people support both causes? How do people support, if they want to support Black Lives Matter movement, if they want to tweet about Pride Month without offending the other camp?
Well, I think there's freedom of speech. I really don't see the issue in supporting both things. I still people see posting pictures, selfies, and walking their dog in Starbucks at the same time they're posting these things about, you know, anything else. So I just really don't see that there should be a fight between the two. Obviously, in my personal opinion, it's like there's a bigger umbrella when we're talking about race relations. That's like it's an umbrella, because a person that's in the LGBTQ community is going to identify with maybe being Black or being a minority. So if we had to talk about an umbrella of what's, I hate to say more important, but what's pressing right now, it would be for me, you know, the movement going on for justice, especially for people of color. But I just really don't see why anyone would feel any type of way about posting about Pride Month and then also posting about the injustices going on. Because I just see plenty of Starbucks all over my feed, and I feel like Pride Month is way more important than Starbucks and walking your dog. So I guess that's where I stand on that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think one takes away from the other. You know, I know, you know, kind of the Black Lives Matter movement is what's depressing, you know, what everyone is seeing. But, you know, I personally wouldn't be offended if I saw, you know, someone that belongs to the LGBTQ community posting something about Pride Month or even celebrating Pride Month, you know, so as long as they're not celebrating it and then talking down on that, you know, on the Black Lives, then I'll be like, oh, wow, okay. But yeah.
Exactly. I'll just kind of follow up on that. I agree with both of my panelists, if you will. But yeah, as long as you're not, you don't put a post like, now that Black Lives Matter is over, let's move to more important things.
Right.
Pride Month. Like, like, come on, like this is an ongoing thing. So just kind of be mindful of what you post and like be respectful. And I don't think you'll have an issue.
Yeah. A few more questions here, actually, some that have just come in the last couple minutes, so this is great. So something I've seen a lot, I'm on social media a lot, and there have been some really great pushes for DEI within APTA, where they've got an entire task force and committee working on these things, and we've got this exchange chat. There's minority scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. And there's also the comments that follow that say, well, we should be putting our efforts where it matters right now. And especially the comment that I think really got to me was, well, I hope that increasing diversity doesn't come at the cost of a lower quality applicant. So is there anything, I know that, Mike, you talked about your imposter syndrome and, you know, waiting for UM to take back their offer, things like that. So is there anything that y'all would want to say to that sentiment?
I think that for that statement to even be valid, you're assuming that the person solely got in on the basis of their skin color. But if the person that was admitted still has the same requirements as you, then there's no way that it's a lower applicant. So I don't know, that's kind of a interesting comment. I mean, that's kind of like fueling what we've been saying here today. Like that's what you should move away from thinking. Like if a person is in that program, in that profession, whatever, they've had the minimum GPA, they've had the minimum GRE, they've had a pretty good resume. I'm pretty sure they've been compared to hundreds of students, and that person got there because they look better on paper, especially if the program didn't have like an interview process. But if they did, like they're on paper, it's not like they have like terrible statistics. The person was meant to be there.
Yeah. That comment, my mouth was just like, oh my gosh, somebody said this. I really can't relate because I know plenty of very, very, very smart minority people. For me, a lower quality applicant or equating that diversity comes at the cost of that is outrageous to me, because there's plenty of qualified minority applicants. Are they going to PT school, or are they going to law school? Are they going to medical school? Are they not choosing the profession because they don't know about it? So for me, it's not about, you know, that a diverse population means a lower quality application or pool of applicants. To me, you need to go into these middle schools and high schools, and there are 4.0 minority students who are looking right over physical therapy. They want to be MDs, they want to be DOs, they want to be dentists, they want to be anything but physical therapists. So we need to go in and speak to them and show them how wonderful of a profession this is. And I think you'll begin to see the same quality of applicants across all races and colors coming into your program. So that, honestly, I'm gonna be offended by that. I'm sorry, that's it.
And I agree.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And to some extent, as a minority, I can relate. So I appreciate y'all being willing to touch on that. We've got a question here about within the PT sphere or outside of it, how do we prevent burnout when we're pushing for greater equality and representation? Social media seems to make us care for 2 weeks on a problem, since bad news floods our feeds every day. That can be then overshadowed. How do we continue with this progress, and how do we, this is me adding on, like, how do we keep up that momentum and that drive?
I think that's one of my fears, is actually that this will die down, this momentum, because it's overwhelming. And I know for me, when I feel overwhelmed, I delete everything. I would delete every single app and just completely shut down if I feel like I can't handle something. But like to Michael Cromartie's statement, stay 10 toes down. That's a quote from Nipsey Hussle, who passed away last year. But it's like, now is the time to just dig in deep. Now you can need to censor and protect your mental health, and you need to do that. So it's probably not healthy to be on all the time. But I think continuing to educate yourself, especially this year, this is an election year. So if nothing else, educate yourself on policy, educate yourself on voting. That's enough to keep you engaged in the systemic injustices that have been going on for years. Just reading about that is staying engaged. So for me, it's maybe just diversify what you're engaging with. Maybe 1 month you're into the protesting thing, the next month you're going to be on social media, the next month you want to learn about all of the petitions that could be signed, and the next month you want to just focus on voting, since by that time it'll be November. I feel like there's just plenty of ways to just keep your mind or part of your mind thinking on this without cutting it off and without losing momentum, but maybe just diversify your momentum in different directions so you don't get burnt out.
Yeah. Also just to add to it, I think, you know, by educating yourself to see that those before us, how long that they were protesting, marching, you know, to get where we are today, showing us like, okay, I saw, I think it was on Twitter that, you know, different causes, it was like 318 days, 185 days, like, you know, kind of just changing that mindset of, instead of like, when will this end, like strapping up to say like, this is just the beginning, you know, we've got the momentum, let's get as much done as we can right now. So that way, if we do get a little, you know, weary or fatigued on the way, we can take a small break and then pick back up, because we've already laid the groundwork to keep progressing and moving forward.
And I think also, sorry, I think also the fact that there's so many different ways to support the cause, and there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of avenues you can help, also adds to it, because especially if you are the type that is okay with protesting, you've been out like every day since all this started, maybe take a break from whatever you're currently doing and then support another way until you're ready to like mentally go back to whatever like you really want to do. So maybe you've been protesting for a week and you're tired, you've been hit by some stray rubber bullets, who knows, but you take a break, you try to put out information, talk to your friends, try to support people who maybe are on the front lines. And then once you're ready, like mentally and physically, like go back. So you aren't.
Sure. And in terms of staying engaged, staying up to date kind of on everything, there was a question that came in asking if y'all have any book suggestions in particular that might hit on racial inequality in healthcare. And I have one too, if anyone can't think of one.
The one I read or listened to was an audiobook just last year. It was a Black Man in a White Coat. I think that one's pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
That's like the main one that stands out to me. One that isn't necessarily like healthcare, but kind of touches on things. It's both in audio and it's like an article, is the Case for Reparations. I talked to you about that Yusra the other day. By
that's right.
Kotis, I hope I'm not butchering his name, but yeah, that kind of lays out like why people are even protesting right now, why there's issues, why we haven't like just moved past this, so to speak. So yeah, those are my suggestions.
Also, the new Jim Crow, by Mikhail Alexander. Yeah, that's a good one that I, you know, every time I'm like, hey, you know, if I have a talk coming up and people want to know what do they learn from, that's like usually number one that people will bring up. So the new Jim Crow is definitely a good one.
Yeah, I was going to say that same one. And she has a workbook that goes along with it with action steps, if you believe her case, because she also mentions that her husband is a police officer and actually strongly disagrees with a lot of things that she's writing. But if you do understand and can digest all that information, she actually has a workbook of action steps that you can take to fight against basically modern day slavery. Pretty much. That's how deep she goes.
And also, if you're not a reader, I know like with Just Mercy on Amazon Prime, The Hate You Give, When They See Us is on Netflix. Those are, you know, about the story of Central Park 5, just like, you know, different movies or documentaries about, you know, other racial inequalities or injustice.
13 as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And if, you know, anyone listening either has a diversity club at Duke, 13th is something we watch every year through Diversity Club. And if you don't have one, this might be the time to start. It might be time to look into starting that club. Y'all, I know we're over time, but I'm sorry. I'm going to keep going just a little bit longer. So bear with me, everybody. Stick with me. I really want to get back to, we talked about it a while ago, but this idea of language. Mike, your post about code switching. Mark, you talking about, you know, the way you speak might be interpreted differently because your voice is deeper or something like that. I also find it interesting that we all went to PT school in the South. And so that has an impact on things. But what would y'all say to someone who hears you talking about code switching and hears you talking about everything else that you're going through and thinks, my gosh, that's a lot. That's a lot mentally to kind of keep track of and deal with. And they say, well, why don't you just be yourself? Just talk how you want to talk. No one's telling you not to change things up. I can handle whatever, whoever you are. So why not?
I don't know. I guess I'll touch on that first. I think it can be kind of annoying if someone just tells me to just be myself, because this is me. This is how I am around y'all. So this is the way I've learned that is safest for me to operate in the space that I'm in right now. And, over time, you kind of learn that not everyone is okay with 100% of the person that you are, be it in the way that you talk or the way that you have fun or the things you like to do. So it's this is the way that you're navigating this space. And, someone kind of is oh, just stop doing that. It's there's been some reasons why I don't want to do that. So, not if you don't code switch, especially in a professional space or in TPT school. And if you just try to be yourself, it can cause maybe your classmates to start discrediting you and your work, not thinking that what you're saying or doing is on the same level as your classmates. Maybe them not wanting to study with you or take your suggestions for things. If they're confused about a question you try to answer, maybe they won't want to hear you out and they'll hear someone else. I know sometimes for me, it was a challenge to get people taking what I was saying sometimes. It can sometimes people just won't think that you can do anything, but it's you're being yourself. And then you see someone else do literally or say the exact same thing and they're met with nothing but positivity. So it's oh, what was the difference,
Yeah, I would say it's all about feeling safe too. And with, I guess some people call it Ebonics or even Black English. There's something that sometimes we only feel safe with each other or with our families. And that's not uncommon. Even I also speak Spanish and it really helps me in the clinic, but there's also a safe space for their language. Some of them actually speak English and they prefer that you actually not speak Spanish to them because they can understand English. And that's their language. It's something they prefer to use at home. And I really only use it unless the patient does not speak English. And I have to really catch myself because I really want to learn and I want to speak Spanish to everybody, but I know that it is not safe. That is something that is for them. And I think that's also something that can be said about maybe the way a Black person would talk amongst their family or even just with their grandparents versus with their cousins. Sometimes there's even a difference there. And it's just about feeling safe. And then to Mark's point, we learned to code switching, I think, as soon as we could start talking, as soon as we went to public school where there were other kids, that's when you learn about code switching. So we didn't just start doing this in undergrad, we've been doing this as long as we've been in class. So it is who we are. We know how to do it. We can assimilate pretty well. So.
And just to add to it, code switching goes way deeper than just in the classroom where, if I call a bill collector or something like that, I have a voice for that. If I'm shooting a charge or something, there's a whole, persona that goes into that. So, and then also when people say be yourself, I take that with a grain of salt sometimes because they've seen me code switch and already now have this less threatening perception of me or a stereotypical perception of me as a Black person versus if I introduce myself to them without code switching, then they now won't be, possibly saying, oh, just be yourself, because now they, their first impression is a lasting impression. But now that they see that I'm able to speak the way they do or whatever, they can say, oh, just be yourself, I can handle it. But it's could you handle that from the start? Or did you have to finally first to get to know me and see who I was and, how I carried myself before, you say be yourself.
Yeah, essentially there's a reason behind, even any sort of change in anything that you might say or do. Briana, you brought up a really interesting statement where you said, that sometimes you have to catch yourself not speak Spanish, even though you want to learn. And so I think a lot of people come at this of, I just want to learn. People are very, very open-minded. and they may reach out to you, for example, right now when it might be a time where this is a little bit more of like a mental burden, for example. What is your advice to people who want to learn and then maybe reach out to a friend of theirs who's a Black or another person of color, and they don't get a whole lot back? The person says, I can't talk about this right now. Yeah, how does that person, you know, stick with it and stick with the cause and realize that it's not personal?
Yeah, that's been coming up a lot. And personally, I like to talk a lot, and I haven't been turning a lot of people down, but sometimes you have to for the sake of time and also for the sake of your mental health. So yes, the first key is to know that that's probably not personal, because this is very overwhelming. Many people have cried. I've shed a lot of tears over the past 2 weeks. So sometimes talking about it is just emotional. So I would say to that person, like, continue to be eager. If someone that you really trust and is your friend, and you've reached out and they're just like, it's not because they don't want to be your friend or anything. It's just they need a little bit of time. So in the meantime, using those resources, you know, that we talked about will be a good thing. If you haven't binge watched on Netflix everything you could binge watch, just go binge watch it. By the time you get finished, I'm sure they'll be ready to talk. Or if you're a reader, just read a book or two and just kind of try to understand from a different perspective, because some people do need the time. And so maybe reach out to different people. Maybe you don't have to reach out to the same person every time. If there's someone else you feel comfortable, maybe ask them. But if you're met with that, not right now, it's just everything's high. It's super, the emotions are extremely high. And you also don't want to be met with a displaced, angry response. And that would probably crush you even more. So it's really a sensitive, and yeah, just really don't take it personal, but try to learn as much as you can before you ask. That way you even know what to ask. You know, maybe you can ask a question that shows that you've actually been studying, and not just tell me everything about the Black experience, because how can we do that in one conversation?
Tell me how much time you have.
Right.
Awesome. And then I think too, like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it kind of goes back to that idea of like feeling safe, and, you know, where is it safe to have these conversations and with whom? And again, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably don't expect people to like read every book on this list and then, you know, they're worthy of your time, but there are ways to make people feel comfortable and show that you're open-minded, and essentially show that you're an ally. There's one microaggression that I was hoping to get y'all's thoughts on, just because I think it's especially important right now. It's the idea of I don't see color. What are y'all's thoughts on that phrase? Because I think it's something that's very well-meaning, and it's something that comes with an open heart. So why is it that, well, I won't even bias the question. I'll just let y'all answer it.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, just real. So I don't like the phrase, and I think Dr. Lisa Van Hoos put it perfectly. You know, we are who we are. You know, and by saying you don't see color is basically telling us that you don't see a part of us. And, you know, instead of not seeing color, I think we should see it and embrace it. You know, it's kind of like a celebration of color. Like, to me, it's an amazing thing when we can see color, and despite any differences, still, you know, cohabitate, get along, and, you know, work well together. But, you know, by telling me you don't see color, it just kind of discredits our individuality. So, you know, while it's harmless in nature, I think, you know, in the direction that we're trying to move forward, it kind of takes away from that by telling us that you don't see the color.
Sure. Yeah.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that's probably one of the most harmful phrases, saying I don't see color. I think, like, it's kind of put out a statement like, all the CIs or clinical instructors out there, do not tell your students that. Faculty, don't tell your minority students that. Directors, don't tell your fellow faculty members that. Clinicians, don't tell your colleagues that you don't see color. Students that aren't minorities, don't tell your minority classmates that. Don't tell your kids that. All around the board, don't tell it, because like Mike said, you're diminishing like our experience. You're ignoring the discrimination, the oppression that happens to us daily by saying I don't see color. So I understand like you probably mean well by it, but until each of us roots out like the biases we have, everyone in this country and really the world, and we start having more of these open conversations, it's very inconsiderate and very possibly even like dangerous to say I don't see color, because like to fight against racism you have to see race. So if you don't see it, then you can't fight against it. So.
I agree.
Sure.
It's also literally false. We all have eyeballs, so we can see everything. So it's just not, it's not logical. And on top of that, if you tell yourself that, you may not be willing to explore the implicit biases that you have because you're just constantly telling yourself that everyone is clear, and it's not true. You will tell yourself that and still clutch your purse in the elevator when Mark gets on. You do see color, you just don't know it. So you need to acknowledge that you do see it and it's something that's there. It's dangerous to pretend that you don't, because then you won't ever look into yourself to see where in these areas do I actually have a bias.
Yeah. All right, this is going to be my very last question, and it's more so just kind of want to open it up. Is there anything else that y'all want to share? Anything about why it is that it's not just up to Black people to be part of this fight again in anti-racism and in anti-Blackness? Is there anything else? Any other stories about, strong allies in your life? Anything at all? This time is y'all's.
So I think I was talking to Mike about this a little while ago, but if there's anyone that like is seeing what's going on right now and seeing the protesting and is kind of like confused as to why people are so disgruntled and upset with even the recent murders, I think this country just hasn't really ever dealt with like the original sins that have happened like hundreds of years ago. We haven't like finally said like, okay, this was wrong, we messed up, and then now let's do this and this to fix it. So it's been 400 years of oppression in different forms, and it's gone on unabated until we came to this time. And then now there's coronavirus. Now there's millions of people out of work, millions of people at home. Everyone's worried about, where they're going to get, everyone's worried about like the next day period. Then there's the recent murders by the police and the ones that don't necessarily make the news or may not even make social media, because a lot of things happen on social media that don't make the news either. But then there's people that don't even post about social media, or like it doesn't get a million retweets. So that the recent events lit this powder keg, and then here we are. So I think that it's understandable why there's so much frustration. But if you really just look at what's like a recent event, then you might not understand it. But it's a group of people being disproportionately treated unfairly for hundreds of years, being denied equal treatment for hundreds of years, being disrespected by cops, murders, like, and it just that you can see it's not a fair treatment. So that's why I feel like we just need to address how we got here first, and then start moving forward, start to heal together.
Yeah. And for me, I just would like to say that the problems that this nation has currently is very systemic and it's intentional. It's not by happenstance. It's not, it just happened to be this way. We did what we were supposed to do. You guys can vote now. Even the things that are going on now, the mass incarceration, this police brutality, this redlining, there's a lot of things that are systematically in place still. And the only way that can change that is if this generation and the generation coming after us learn to stand up for what is right. And if you are willing to lose friends and family and jobs to stand up for what's right, you have to be, or else this is going to continue. So if you're watching this, if you're an ally and you know what's going on is wrong and you've seen it in multiple areas, but you're quiet, you can't stay that way, because then your kids are going to grow up in that environment. And if you don't say something, you're going to raise kids that won't say something, and you're just going to perpetuate the problem. So everyone, I would say, dig deep, and we have to be willing to rise up. We have to be willing to do things we wouldn't normally do, to say things we wouldn't normally say, to lead things we wouldn't normally lead. Or 200 years from now, we're going to be right here Same problem, different arena. That is all that has happened. It's systemic, and we have to weed out the weeds. There's weeds that have been in there, and they have some strong systems to stay there, but we have the power. We band together. We can change that, but it's going to take more than a couple of weeks and some social media tweets and a protest.
Yeah.
Going to be hard to follow up these two, but I guess for one, you know, the people in power who have the position to make change, like right now, you know, speaking from a PT perspective, so like chairs of departments and things of that nature, I think what really helps is representation all across the board. I can literally tell you the names of every Black physical therapist that came in and spoke to us, guest lecture, or, you know, was our professor. And for me, that gave me, you know, like a line of hope. You know, that kind of gave me hope, like I can make it. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can see the other side just from seeing those 6 individuals, you know. And I still to this day remember, you know, the first time I saw a Black PT come and speak to us. And like, I made it my duty after class to be like, please mentor me, like, you know, because that was my first Black, someone that looked like me that was in the profession. And so, you know, that meant a lot to me. I still have his number to this day. Like, I text his mom, you know, happy birthday, things like that. So, you know, I think to, you know, any chairs that are watching, that means a lot to your minority students to have kind of that safe space or somebody that they can see themselves in teaching the class. That, you know, kind of gives them hope. But also just kind of, you know, don't be afraid to be uncomfortable. I think, you know, that's how anyone grows in any situation. You know, just like when you're, you know, learning OIANs in anatomy, you know, maybe the first time you're uncomfortable learning it, but on the other side, there is growth. So, you know, I have those challenging conversations with my dad about the protest and how we should be protesting, just because of generations, different generations, we share different views on how it should be done. And with my stepmom, she's a police officer. So, you know, we get this rhetoric of good cop versus bad cop, all cops aren't good, bad cops, things of that nature. And, you know, I'm not afraid to have that uncomfortable conversation because I know she's in the police force. She can be that change that we need to see from the inside out. So, you know, I like to practice what I preach. And I think it's important that, you know, we're uncomfortable now, you know, so that later we don't have to have these talks because, you know, while the people who aren't experiencing this are tired of it, you know, imagine those colleagues who you call a friend, who have to deal with this night in and night out, don't get to take that break. You know, we don't have that opportunity. It's like, okay, we turned our phone off, but that's not going to change the looks we get when we go to the grocery store or when we go for a run, whatever it may be. So if you think you're tired or fatigued from all of this, just put yourself in the shoes of those that you call friends who don't have the opportunity to take a break.
Yeah. There is no closing statement I can give that's going to be worthy of this chat. So all I can say is thank you to the 3 of you. I love and respect you 3 so much. And it's very difficult to put yourself out there. So I want to thank everyone who has been so welcoming in the comments as well, and to everybody watching and who's ready, because it's time to be an ally. It's time to be uncomfortable. It's time to be anti-racist, and it's time to join the fight. Real quick, I definitely want everyone to read your blog post, but also if they did want to reach out and maybe like follow your work, all 3 of you have blogs. So do you mind telling everyone real quick where they can find you? We'll start with Briana, I'll go to Mike, and then to Mark.
Okay, so the easiest place to find me is probably on Instagram because I'm not as active on Facebook. So my Instagram is dr.bri_the PT. So Dr. Bree, the PT. And I don't know if there's a way to type it, but yeah, that's my Instagram. And on Facebook, I'm Briana Sade Scott. So that's probably the 2 easiest ways to get to me.
And so you can find me on Twitter at Mike, M-I-K-E, Crow, C-R-O, D-P-T. That's probably where you're more than likely going to get a response. But you can also find me on Facebook with Michael Cromartie, I mean, maybe my middle name as well, but it's the second. It's the second if you find me on Facebook, because my dad, yeah, you'll find someone else if you reach out to the original Michael Cromartie. So, but the platforms, you can reach me on Instagram, but I'd rather not because it's not really like a physical therapy platform. So just Twitter or Facebook for sure.
Mm.
You can reach out to me on Twitter at Mark the SBT. There's no dots or anything. It's straightforward. So I think that's the best way. I have an Instagram as well, but it's kind of like Mike. It's like, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. Yeah, so I think Twitter is probably the best place.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. I skipped announcements at the beginning, so bear with me all one more minute. I'm just going to give a quick few closing announcements that I was going to give at the beginning. But one, read their blog posts. They are great. I've never met any of you in person, and yet I just feel like I've gotten to know you so much better through your writing, so I really appreciate you putting that out there. Two, we have a part 2 to this chat coming up. It's going to be called same thing, Fostering Allyship and DEI. This time we'll talk more about gender and sexual DEI. That'll be on June 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern, same place. Applications for the Student Assembly Board of Directors are open, including my position as Director of Communications. So if you want to meet incredible people like this and get on Do Exchange chats, please reach out to me, and also reach out to your 3 members of your nominating committee on the Student Assembly Board of Directors. They're a fantastic resource for just applications and election process in general. And then this feels exceptionally relevant today. We're always looking for more blog posts on the Pulse blog, so you can submit your draft idea or your post idea to pulse@apta.org. Thank you all so much. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you, Yusra. Fantastic job.
Yeah.